the enemy's wiles, whether he's behind this virus or whatever it is that keeps us from gathering. But even under normal circumstances, you enable us through the skill that you give men and women for us to gather such as we are. Father, I do ask that you would bless and watch over each man and the household that he represents here after we separate our time. We look forward to hearing from Scott. Give us eyes to hear, eyes to see, and ears to hear what message you have for us through him. I thank you for the privilege of being part of this group of men again, and we thank you for Claire's leadership. Holy Spirit, lead our conversation, and may we honor and glorify you, Lord God, the Father Most High, in our time together. It's in Jesus' holy name that we gather and pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Dan. Well, guys, we are honored today to have Scott Haima with us. He's going to talk about 20 minutes, and then we'll send you into breakout rooms. Scott, if you can, give us a couple of ideas what you would like us to talk about while in those breakout rooms, and we'll come back together for the last 10 minutes of the call with the best ideas from each of the breakout rooms. So as a matter of introduction, I've known Scott, I'm going to say about 3 to 4 years. Originally as an NCMM member, I got to watch his leadership. Tremendous respect for him as an incredibly intentional leader, and I've seen some amazing growth with your organization. I love watching the people that serve leaders and their attitudes toward him. And Scott has a team of people who absolutely love him, even when we sometimes have to make tough choices. Also, a lot of respect for you as a father, just watching you on Facebook and the way you love on your kids. And more honored than ever, I believe, I'm going to say a year and a half to 2 years ago, Scott joined the NCMM board and brought his leadership skills to bless NCMM. It's been huge. So thanks for being here, Scott. Anxious to hear what God has on your heart.
Thanks. It's actually been 5+ years because I was looking back at some of our old Iron Sharpens Iron speaking, and you spoke for us in 2015 in Buffalo.
Wow.
But the little bit of the promo that we talked about, and this is going to be a little bit different than what Chuck Stecker talked about recently. Chuck is a main mentor of mine. He actually sat on our board for several years. And I really believe that there is a difference between the words intergenerational and multi-generational. Think of the family car going to church. Typically in most churches in North America today, that family vehicle, the children will go to their service, the youth will go to theirs, and the adults will go to theirs. We'll look at it in silos. Well, that is multi-generational. They're all gathering together in one place. But intergenerational is when you span all of those silos, you pass information from one generation to the other. And that's what we want to talk a little bit about today. And, my challenge to you is that the lion's share of mentoring and discipling our boys and young men should be done in a masculine context by men. And this may sound like a good idea, right? We think that, especially of all of us, very passionate about ministry to men. My father instilled this passion in me as early as the age of 8. He was my leader in a ministry very similar to the one that I lead in now, and he's still involved at the age of 87. And
wow.
Yeah, this is a good concept. We believe in it, but it's also biblical. And let me just share my screen real quick here. Make sure I do the right screens. In 2 Timothy 2:2, it states, "And what you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, and trust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also." I love the ESV version because NIV has said a person, but yes, we know that anybody can be able to teach others also. But I love this context of men being able to teach others. In this short verse, Paul is writing to Timothy, there's 4 generations of passing it on. And also in Titus 2, all right, there we go. I call it the Titus 2 principle. Starting in verse 2, older men are to be sober-minded, dignified, self-controlled, sound in faith and love and in steadfastness. In verses 3 through 5, then it talks about women and how women should be mentoring and discipling young women. Then picking up in verse 6, and this is speaking to the men, likewise, urge the younger men to be self-controlled. Show yourself in all respects to be a model of good works. And in your teaching, show integrity, dignity, and sound speech that cannot be condemned, so that an opponent may be put to shame, having nothing evil to say about us. So this isn't just a good concept or a good idea. God is actually mandating us, telling us that we should do this in a masculine, gender-specific way. Now, our culture is definitely trying to blur those lines considerably. Dr. Michael Gurian, he has written several books. Now, let me see if I can say this right. I recommend his books, but I don't necessarily endorse them. They're not faith-based. He is Jewish, so he believes in design. He believes in God, but he has a lot of good things to say about the science of the difference between boys and girls. Excuse me. Let me read a quote from his book, Saving Our Sons, A New Path for Raising Healthy and Resilient Boys. I have never been as worried as I am right now for our sons. Some boys are doing very well, but millions are disappearing into violence, imprisonment, social withdrawal, listlessness, virtual worlds, and real-life self-destruction. He concludes with, we are in denial about our males. So science has been recently very much showing the culture that there's differences between men and women. Girls have a higher level of oxytocin. Boys have higher levels of testosterone. So what does that affect? You know, our hormones. It develops self-worth differently, a fight or flight, tend or befriend. You know, you have more testosterone, you have a higher level of risk-taking. Aggression versus empathy nurturance, and this is an important one too. Aggression versus violence. So in our culture today, the paradigms of education are totally going the easy route, and they're going the easy route of the oxytocin-based strategies. You know, think about your sons or yourself in school. You sat there in sometimes in the same desk all day, trying to learn what the teacher is passing on to you. And God points out in Deuteronomy chapter 6, you know, I think it's starting around verses 6, that he talks about, you know, impressing these commands upon our children. When we walk by the road, when we sit down, when we lay down, when we stand up. When is that? It's basically all the time. So that is life learning, not necessarily informational learning. So I make no apologies for, you know, being, you know, making reference to our ministry of Christian Service Brigade often. We have been doing this 83 years, and we understand how boys and young men like to learn, and they like to learn with their hands. They like to do things by action. And in our current paradigm, the oxytocin basis, it is a whole lot more just sit there and listen to what we have to say. And that is causing some of the troubles that we're experiencing today. And when we can get a good grasp of how our brains are wired differently, we can move to a better, stronger position of mentoring and disciple them. Now, there's going to be rebellion, and there's been rebellion for years. You know, if you remember the movie long ago, Rebel Without a Cause, I doubt that ever would be made about a woman. You know, we've had these through our generations, but we, as I mentioned, we need more awareness of this. Now, in our recognition of this, in our cultures today, especially in America, what do we place a high priority on? What are like the top two? Can you guess what the top two things that we try to instill in our boys?
The culture or the church or parent?
Yeah, what does our culture emphasize as important to as when you become a man? What are the top two? Any guesses?
Self-dependence.
A little bit more expanding on that, Ray.
Independence?
How about material acquisition and self-dependence? We kind of say like, how much do you make? And what and the other one in essence of time is education. You know, how far have you gone in your education? We really many parents and others, and it's like, all right, the important thing for you to do is get a good education and a good paying job. And that's at the expense of our spiritual growth. Now, other cultures recognize this. Dr. Jagdish Kulanapur, if I say that correct, he's in India. He has stated, in my culture, we do not have this arrogance. We know that boys and girls are made very differently. We know and respect this even before birth. Not to do so, we believe, is to bring trouble upon us. We make separate spiritual rituals for each sex, natural and predetermined being. So in our culture, in our society, we have the choice of whether to fight our natural and God-given characteristics or channel them effectively. Now, many years ago, there has been a movement of environment is the prime mover. What environment do we put our children, especially boys, in? And that's going to make them what they want them to be. Well, that has backfired. That has backfired big time, especially with our males and our boys. Boys of a group have not changed despite decades of trying to make them change. Not only have they not changed, they've gotten more aggressive and more antisocially dangerous. The very thing that decades ago we thought that we would try to nurture out of them. And they've done that by demeaning masculine culture in many ways and elevating the feminine culture. So as I had mentioned earlier about the differences between aggression and violence, there is a difference, and God through testosterone has gave us each aggression, and we should not be ashamed of that as males. And when they do, they confuse the two. Now, have any of you ever heard of a game called American Eagle? Now, Joel's raising his hand. Howard, my friend Howard and my brothers north of the border, they call it British Bulldog. But let me explain this game real quick. We line up all the boys or young men in one line. Take one or two and put them in the middle of the field. They say go. The boys on the line, boys or young men on the line, start to run. Now, the goal of the guys in the middle is to either tackle or pick up. We do it as we want them to pick them up. So when you pick somebody up off of the ground fully, they are now, part of the center of the game. They're out of the game, and they become one of the people who try to pick up as well. If any part of your body is still on the ground, you're still in. So they're squirming. Our only rule is don't hurt on purpose. And when many times if we have to play this indoors, and they at my church, they took our gym away and made it into a children's worship center. And so we play in what's called the fellowship mall, and there's tables and chairs out there. And if there's moms out there watching, I'm like, oh no, what are they going to think? And many times there's tears. Just think about how, aggressive this game is. And so, but you want to know who typically asked for that game the first time, the next time? The ones who had tears. And I love to explain to them about the differences between the guys and the girls, is that God gave us this aggression. This is actually a form of nurturing. Dr. Gurian talks about these in his book. Women do this nurturing in different ways. They can have social teas and get together and have, most churches have those Christmas teas. Well, if you get the guys together and play trash can ball or American Eagle, they're going to go away loving each other. And that's, how God has designed us. So we talked a little bit about this masculine context and what we should do. So what does it look like? So mentoring manhood, especially in a biblical context. Now, the society as a whole, when we all live out the Great Commission. Now, we need to speak truth and love. In our culture today, we know that gender is being attacked. We're saying, we're being told by many that it's fluid and you can make up your own mind. And, in this instance, we need not to be like the old men who not getting political on you, but from the debate last week, just sitting there defending their turf, get off my lawn. You know, we need to do this in love and respect. And we don't have any perfect answers, but especially talking to the younger generations, we need to understand where they're at. So we need to come back to the common sense of God's design and their upbringing of boys and young men. So when we work with them, we need to give them acceptance, action, and knowledge through the experience they need. When we accomplish this as a whole, we don't create more random violence. We actually ensure less of it. Growing to maturity is the goal of all boyhood. A boy's life is marked by change. Each area is different than from who he was before. Many of you who have raised sons, you understand and know this. This is a process. This is, you know, you need to keep telling them the same thing over and over again. And sometimes we get frustrated as fathers and parents. It's like, I already told you that, sometimes yesterday. But when we understand that, we're mentoring from more of a position of power. And many times his interests undergo such radical changes from one year to the next, and that's normal. And when we understand that, we don't try to fit him into a box that we thought he was just the year before. Now, seen in the light of God's purpose and design of growing to manhood, these changes can be expected and understood. Through all these changes, of course, each boy is different. And despite their differences, all boys and young men have three basic drives: the urge to be, to do, and to know. And we, as fathers, parents, mentors, and educators, we can stop feel we're fighting against the masculinity that God gave us and start to work with it. So today, in raising our sons and our young men as God intended, similar to our lives as God-fearing Christians, it's countercultural. So what can we do about this? You know, there's a phrase out there that has unfortunately become politically incorrect. Boys will be boys. I recently read an article that the subject line of this online article was, "The war on boys narrative is back." Ugh. Well, we should never condone overly mischievous, rude, or childish behavior, but we also need to recognize what God has given us in our boys. Many of them are being medicated just for being squirmy, and understanding and recognizing that is very critical. So as I've stated, 3 points that I want you to take away from today is all boys and young men have 3 urges: the urge to be, to do, and to know. And so the urge to be, every boy wants to be accepted. So he wants to develop some sort of a self-worth, and he knows this and understands it. And he has to accept himself as God made him. So he wants to start to live up to his ideal of success. Well, where does he get this? This is where we as men come into play. We start to develop him into the ideas of a biblical manhood. I like to say many times, if we do not mentor our boys and young men, the world will. They're gonna look for it. So who's gonna guide them? So when he gets to be a young man, a struggle now starts to ensue. If he's not living up to the ideals that he set for himself, that he understands, you want to know what most young men will do? They'll lower the bar. They'll lower their standards to meet where they're acting. That's where us as men come into play. We need to hold them accountable. We need to make sure that they are living up to the ideals and standards that God has set for them. I remember a time when I was at a junior leadership training camp, and I was a senior in high school, and I went out early with everybody else was an adult man, and I had just recently got my driver's license. I don't even think my father let me drive his car alone yet. And we were sitting around this planning meeting, and they needed some supplies from town. One of the leaders threw me the keys of his car and said, "Here, Scott, go run into town, get the supplies." And he gave me some extra money. And by the way, get some Frosties at Wendy's. I was floored. This man, he knew me a little bit, but not much. gave me the keys to his car. And, you know, I really felt accepted as an adult at that point. So, you know, we need to make sure that our boys and young men feel accepted. All right, every boy has an urge to do. They love action, especially physical action. I was talking about that game, American Eagle. They want chances to prove they're stronger than the next guy. Remember when we were younger, what did we used to brag about? Oh, my dad can beat up your dad. You know, that's just typical male, you know, talking. And, you know, we have a competitive spirit. I typically, you know, many times in a lot of situations, I'll try to make a game of something, you know, and walk away. And I'm not ever shy of, you know, I typically don't have that T-ball mentality. I like to keep score. There are winners and losers, and it's okay. It's okay for that. One of my, I tell people it's a disease of mine. If you know a Pinewood Derby, in our ministry, we call it a stock car derby. Pinewood is a Boy Scout trade name. I developed an open division at my church just so I can still make a car. There's so many teachable moments in this, and it's competitive. And at my church, I do not give a participation trophy. If you made a car and it wasn't fast enough or it didn't win design, try better next year, you know, is our encouragement. There's so many teachable moments. But that competitive action is us as guys to a T, right? So we want to give boys these action. So every boy loves this. You know, and you as an adult being right in the middle of it with them is just amazing. Joel Howard, remind me of the phrase that Brigade used to say a while ago that I don't think we say. I think we used to say we don't separate the boys from the men, correct? Yeah, we don't really say that anymore because it could be misconstrued in some contexts. But, you know, in that phrase is, you know, we want to make sure that that intergenerational aspect, because and show the young men how much of action and full of life you are. And so the final urge that all boys and young men have is every boy wants to know. So boys of all age are continually experimenting, investigating, and asking questions, trying to discover how things work. So he finds real enjoyment and value from guided investigations. And most often boys want to try it themselves to find things out. So do things with them with an active nature. In Brigade, in our older age group, 12 to 18, we have leaders guides for the adults to guide them through typically a 4-week process. One of them is small engines. So we encourage the leaders to bring in, let's say, a lawnmower engine or something else and start taking it apart. If you can get multiple engines, to let them actually take it apart. And then all the while, what we're doing is we're gonna teach them unity in Christ. During this, during this is that each part of that engine has a critical part to play. The carburetor. If you don't have that carburetor, the engine's going to sputter and may not run. Spark plugs. Each part has its own place. Same thing with each of us in the body of Christ. So as we're trying to teach them biblical principles, we're having some fun tearing apart an engine. We like to do a lot of things active. And again, if I want to reiterate, if we're not teaching them things of the world within a biblical context, the world will. And so we as men must need to take a very active role in this. So when we understand these 3 basic urges in boys, to be, to do, and to know, we're mentoring from a position of knowledge, because mentoring is a process, not this overnight fix. All right, before we get to some challenges of our breakouts, do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, Scott, could you give us the name of that? I think you said he was a Jewish doctor that wrote Saving Our Sons.
Yes, his name is Dr. Michael Gurian. It's Gurian. He also wrote a good book called The Wonder of Boys. I actually did a seminar with him in Arizona with Tim Wright. Many of you may, Tim was with us at the NCMM in Denver. I think we were actually in Golden, but when we were in Denver, I believe it was 2015. Tim wrote a really good book too, Searching for Tom Sawyer. I do highly recommend that. Tim's a pastor in the Phoenix, Arizona area. He and Dr. Michael Gurian have connected, and they have conferences on saving our sons.
And then, sorry to interrupt, do you have that list that you mentioned, the difference between boys and girls? Do you have that written out?
Which list were you talking about again, Ray? I'm sorry.
The difference between boys and girls, you're talking about self versus this.
Oh, the
Befriend.
self-worth. There's, fight or flight, some of the differences between oxytocin and testosterone, tend or befriend, risk
Do you have that written out? The whole list? If not, that's okay. I was just curious because you said it so rapidly, I didn't get to write everything down.
Okay. Well, I'll say them again. The fight or flight.
Yeah.
The tend or befriend, the risk taking, status seeking, aggression versus empathy, nurturing, and then aggression versus violence.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, many times in our culture, and even in our local churches, we used to partner in our ministry at one point with almost 3,000 churches. Now it's under 200. And it's not even just our culture that's taking the easy way out. Our local churches are as well. They're not placing a high priority on men being involved in this. And that's going to be my challenge to you. During the breakouts. We, in a Christian Service Brigade, we consider ourselves experts in equipping and training men to mentor and disciple the next generation. Our vision is to see all men take responsibility to lead, equip, and disciple each generation. And the each word is, as you are mentoring boys and young men, you are also, it's a wonderful men's ministry opportunity. When I got involved in Brigade, 5 other men did as well. We're all still involved in some way or another. I cannot imagine my life without them in it. They are truly brothers of mine. And as we mentor through this process and do this, oh, I hate it when I lose my point. Getting too old here. No, this is embarrassing. But we're mentoring, I said, from a position of strength. And are you talking about local churches? And when men don't step up, the church will take the easy way out, and that's what they've been doing. Women will clearly fill our step in the roles that we have for this. Now, I do want to point out that we fully believe that God has given us the guidance as parents and fathers to be the primary person responsible to mentor and disciple our boys. Fathers. But what we do in Christian Service Brigade is we come alongside them. As I had mentioned, we're the experts in training and equipping them. Many men say, I want to do a good job in raising my son, but I just don't know where to start. So most of the volunteers in our local churches are fathers, and many will continue on for years after that, even though their sons are grown. And but there's many other men who are involved. I love this one recruiting aspect of volunteering as well. Well, I only have daughters. I don't know if I should be involved. And I'm like, well, yes, you should, because then you have a hand in potentially raising a future husband for one of your daughters. So I use that as a good recruiting tool for men to pass it on, because all of us as men should be seeking out some sort of a Timothy in our life. That's my challenge. How do we get the men of today, especially the 20, 30 somethings, excited, understand that if we don't mentor our boys and young men, the world will. How do we get them involved? Whether it be through a contextual program such as Christian Service Brigade or in one-on-one. We do like the aspect of this, our ministry, because Robert Lewis states in his book, Raising a Modern Day Knight, a community of men is very important. Those 5 men that I talked about that are my brothers, we all gave permission to each other to speak into our sons' lives. Made a huge difference. You know, I know that we're bumping up against the time, but I could tell you a story about my 2 oldest sons versus my youngest, and the clear differences in their lives as adult males now, with other men speaking into their lives. So that's our challenge on the breakouts: is how do we, in our culture and society today, get our young men, and not even just young men, but our Chuck Stecker, he was on a few weeks ago. He wrote a book, If You've Passed the Baton, Take It Back. We need our older men back in the game as well. The intergenerational aspect of passing on the next generation all the way down. So thanks for the time today. Hope I didn't speak too fast. We had a lot of good information here. I'll put my contact information. If you have any other questions, you can call me or email me. I'll put it in the chat. But Claire, thank you for the time to be able to share today, because maybe it came out today or not, but as I said, my father instilled this passion in me at the age of 8, and I'm so blessed to be able to do it for a vocation now, because I think it's one of the most important things that we need to do.
Thanks, Scott, man. You're a blessing and a wealth of information. And for those of you who are taking notes as fast as you could, we always record these events. Next week, you'll get an email from me, as well as a post on social media with a link to the recording. So I'm going to send you guys into breakout rooms. There'll be 4 rooms. If you can, get a spokesman from each room. We'll come back together at 10 before the hour and share any ideas from each group. So if each group could have 1 person to come back and share, that'd be awesome. And enjoy your time together in breakout rooms.
Yeah. So, we're back. I think I dominated that last part. Sorry about that, guys.
I don't know how you did it, Rod Hanley, but you beat everybody back from the Twilight Zone. Good job.
Way to go.
It is always fun watching these faces all disappear and then come back. Just fascinates me. Well, I think we got everybody back. Welcome. I'd like to have 1 representative from each group. Just tell us the best part of your conversation so we can all learn from what you talked about.
Yeah, Claire, Don, Shirk, I think everybody else in room 1 took a step back, which made me the leader. So I tried to beat out of them what was the one thing you heard. And I started off by tipping my hat to Mike Young, who gave us some training here in Virginia a while back on, he had some big long word that had been used to a seminary discussion about it, but basically the move in the church to treat men and women to thinking that treating them equally means you have to treat them as if they're the same, and the dangers of that. And wow, if we don't see abundant evidence of that all around us, then it just adds to the challenge that we have. So I asked Brian what he thought, and he was talking about his experience with Boy Scouts, And just the incredible result of using a hands-on training. The meetings look like total chaos. You don't know exactly what's happening or what the scouts are absorbing. But later on, when you look at them and you start asking them questions, it is absolutely incredible the depth of understanding that they walk away with and how much they've learned about leadership. So he was very much validated the be, do, know, and said, you know, despite what all the attorneys on the commercials are saying about the Boy Scouts, there's a lot of good work going on, and we should be very proud that that's happening. Howard basically said ditto to everything we heard at the front end, but validated, you know, the long-term involvement he's had with the ministry, and just you know, just that it works. And then we ended up with Merv telling us, as a younger man than many of us, that he has an 8-month-old son, and among other things, what this spoke to him and what he's learned is the importance of balancing between family and career, and to make sure that he gets in there at the right times and early to begin the mentoring process. And I congratulated him on that, because that's something most of us didn't learn for many, many years, and had some ground possibly to recover to start that. So those were our takeaways.
Great. Thanks for sharing. Next group.
I'll jump in since I have a habit of taking notes. So we had Dan and Brian and Elmo. I feel very blessed to be a part of that group. Thank you, Claire. And we talked around and round about engaging churches as parachurch ministries, and trying to impress and encourage the importance of biblical discipleship. And Brian Doyle brought up the book Master Plan of Evangelism, which has been very influential. You know, it's Jesus's plan that we select someone. That's the first chapter, select, right? And in his experience with the navigators, they would always ask, who's your man? And so that would be one question that I think our group would value highly and present to the group. Who's your man, right? And then we were thinking about another litmus test or a question to ask a pastor or someone involved at a church to get them to be thinking about this. And the question we came up with would be, how many older men are involved on purpose in discipling a younger man in your church? And then just stop. Let them think, let them ponder, right? Because many of them would not even know how to start, how to begin something like that. And so, you know, we see the biblical value in teaching and discipling young men. And Dan especially brought out the idea of many of them are asking, what is the true biblical perspective on these big current events, you know, sexuality, politics, I would add racial harmony. And Elmo jumped in and shared, you know, from his experience, you don't want to hurt a pastor's ego, right? But you want to gently push them, encourage them, and nudge them, and do everything you can.
Dan.
Oh, did Dan say that? Okay,
I think so. Yeah. Yeah, I think.
Any case, we enjoyed the interaction around that common theme.
Awesome. Next group.
Okay, I'll jump in. I had Joel Fiskus, he's Christian Service Brigade area director, and then Clark Osborne from Omaha, he's with Real Momentum Ministries. And I'm looking, I also take notes, Ray, I guess that's just something in our DNA. And as I look at my notes, I think of it, you know, what we really talked about here is the question was, how do we engage fathers and other men to disciple young boys? Because it's not an easy connect in our culture today. And the progression here is start with something like the book Raising a Modern Day Knight. When I've exposed men to that out of our men's ministry and so on, it almost always ends up with a small group of fathers or something, and I give them the kit, and then they run off on their own and they start studying it together. and they can do great things. And Joel brought up one of these great things that might happen that the Christian Service Brigade is putting together, and that is like Father-Son Adventure Days, where it's a big event. So the next motivating factor is to get fathers to come in and spend a day, for instance, doing different stations around the area, and for instance, learning fishing at one, and maybe hunting at another, and maybe biking at another, and so on like that. So that's kind of like the second step in that direction, to try to recruit men out of their homes and bring their sons to that kind of thing. And then finally, I shared that in our church, we have a guy who's very, very passionate about mentoring young men. And he has a group called Thoroughbreds, and they're 8 boys. He just simply spends a lot of time with them. And he's teaching them theology, and he brings in sort of like experts from the church in different areas to teach them things. But he's also teaching them very hands-on things like auto mechanics, and just you know, finances and all kinds of things like that. He's literally mentoring these boys one-on-one, on his own, figuring out how to do it as he goes along, and doing a great job. So that's sort of a progression from just kind of coming across some concepts in a book to actually having an event that kind of gets things rolling a little bit more and gets fathers and sons together. And then finally getting going on mentoring them through some sort of an ongoing program that goes way deeper. So I thought that's most of what we talked about.
Great. I think we may have one more group that didn't share yet. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'll share quickly, because Mike and Eric both went off, and Rod was pointing to me. I says, somebody else do it. I've been doing all the talking. But Eric shared about some things that they're doing, which, you know, are kind of event-based to get their younger guys out, and it's working. But I also challenged him. I said, okay, you're getting guys out, but they're being consumers. How do we get them to model 2 Timothy 2:2? You know, what my challenge was. And Mike Young shared about his, I think it's his number 2 or 3 son, is at Virginia Tech, and he has led other students, other classmates on the Series 33 several times. And he's kind of shocked at how many of his classmates have no idea what biblical manhood is. They weren't taught it growing up. And so I think that is probably a good beginning place for a lot of us if we want to engage our 20, 30 somethings to really model 2 Timothy 2:2, is we need to, how do we get them and teach them? We're not, all right, don't come to our conference, don't, you know, come to this seminar. They're like, that's not for me. So to find ways to teach them biblical manhood that they missed out on growing up. And Mike put in the chat area a good article. He says, is faithful discipleship spontaneous or structured? And there's good you know, aspects to both of that. A good spontaneous typically will include food, fellowship, but if you don't have a structured path, you know, many times that's all it will be, is food and fellowship. I'm just going to share my screen. Of course, I'm not apologizing again for sharing things about my ministry. Did I share the correct screen where it said you can see Explorer and Guide?
Yes.
Okay, this is our 12 to 18-year-olds achievement path. And so we've got a structured path, and you can see all the things that they'll learn on this structured through an adult man, right relationships, missing the mark, the price of sin, Jesus paid the price, so on and so forth. And so having something structured is kind of a bad word, programs in the context of a local church today, but it is extremely effective, and we know that.
Great. Well, thanks, guys. We are just a couple of things. The chat screen, lower right-hand corner, should see 3 dots. If you click on Save Chat, all that information will be downloaded to your local hard drive, and you have access to it. Almost impossible to know how to follow up Scott Haima, but we do have a strong lineup coming. I want to tell you our next 3 speakers for the Zoom calls. Patrick Morley in 2 weeks, 4 weeks from now, Paul Cole, and 6 weeks from now, Robert Lewis. So some real strength in men's leadership. Can't wait to see what those guys are willing to share. Thanks for being on the call. I'll pray us out, and wish you guys have an amazing end of your week. Father God, thank you for the opportunity to raise in particular our topic today, young men. And God, we acknowledge that these are your sons first, and you give them on loan to us. And God, we thank you for the courage that we have to try to mentor these young men. God, give us wisdom. Thank you for great leaders like Scott, and continue to bless them with ideas and how we can take back ground from the enemy. Thanks for this group of men. I pray blessing on their ministry, protection over them and their families as they continue to do battle for men's hearts and for men to turn their hearts back to you. Thanks for this time together. And God, thank you for being a loving God and for being on this call with us. Amen.
Let me
Amen.
just
Amen.
leave this
Have a
thought
good day,
with you,
everybody. See ya.
that God does not give us godly men. He gives us boys.
Good. Guys, have an amazing end of your week.
Thank you.
Good to be back. See you guys.
Thanks, you as well.
Thank you.
Bye now.